At surface level, Halo 2's Uprising depicts the Arbiter's journey to Delta Halo's control room, but the underlying story is really a smaller one of revenge. It's an odd level, as despite it appearing close to the end of the game, it barely advances the wider narrative, yet it is nonetheless still significant in story terms. Uprising opens with the Arbiter arriving in the vicinity of Installation 05's control room as he heads on his merry way to no fanfare whatsoever. Unusually, the cinematic contains no dialogue, and there won't be any until it ends, when you stumble upon this elite on the verge of death.
Weaklings. Brutes have betrayed us. The Counselors.
Elite bodies are piled everywhere you look, with brutes further along the path debating how they should dispose of the Arbiter's fallen comrades littering the area.
Let's just throw them over the edge. Where's the fun in that?
A sobering introduction made all the more somber by the fantastic accompanying music. These early scenes set the tone for much of the level's self-contained story, which I'll elaborate on momentarily. Witnessing the brutality on display, pardon the pun, the temptation will be to grab an energy sword, charge in and begin slashing your way through the many enemies blocking your path. However, like at the start of the Arbiter earlier in Halo 2's campaign, you can opt for a more subtle approach, for roughly 30 seconds or so. Even clearing out the first 3 brutes without being rumbled can be a tricky proposition, and silently dispatching any more after that may as well be impossible. It might actually be impossible for all I know. I certainly couldn't manage it despite multiple attempts, which is disappointing as the area's layout with its tight pathways is tailor-made for sneaking around. The brutes reacting to 2 of their pack being taken out is something you don't see often.
Go see what's taking them so long.
There may be no further opportunities to continue your stealthy approach once they've investigated, but I appreciate there being at least subtle acknowledgement of you choosing to play it cool to begin with. Once plenty of brute bodies have been added to a battlefield now covered in corpses, several elites, including a zealot, arrive to provide support. If you were expecting the Arbiter's first foray having met the Gravemind to be one of great importance to 2's overarching story, like Master Chief witnessing the Great Schism prior, then you may be disappointed. Other than an extremely brief exchange with Halfjaw at Uprise's conclusion, nothing included contributes to the big picture in any meaningful way. Your only real objective from start to finish is to reach Delta Halo's control room by any means necessary. That doesn't mean Uprising has nothing to offer though, with Bungie breaking convention in the way missions are ordered to tell the elite's story. Up to this point, the entire campaign has been about pairs. Outskirts and Metropolis, the Arbiter and the Oracle, Delta Halo and Regret, and Sacred Icon and Quarantine Zone, all of them function as 2-part tales. Uprising is part of a duo too, with Last Level The Great Journey being its other half for all intents and purposes, but unlike those other examples just listed, they are disconnected from each other, much like Gravemind and High Charity are for Master Chief. I'm sure Bungie spent ages debating whether to join each set, and in the end, I think they made the right decision not to. While their ordering does break the campaign's lovely neat pattern up to the end of Quarantine Zone, it helps the Arbiter's story flow much better. You see the conflict between the Covenant, brutes especially, and the elites break out during Gravemind, and you then see the consequences of that betrayal from the Arbiter and the elite's perspective straight after. If High Charity followed Gravemind instead, as it should do if we consider the rest of the campaign's logic, I think by the time you rejoined the Arbiter, the Covenant's treachery would carry less weight. After all, you'd have already seen them getting their just desserts, with Holy City High Charity overrun by the Flood and another prophet killed. As events are presented in the final product, you watch the Covenant plunge a knife into the back of the elites, and you then get to plunge a literal sword into the backs of lots of Covenant, which makes for a far more satisfying chain of events. It's a really entertaining, almost self-contained story of sorts. The Arbiter, initially alone, is joined by a squad of elites and a few grunts, and together they exact revenge on the Covenant for their crimes. Nothing is spoken of the Great Journey, the war between humanity and the Covenant, or the Flood's presence on the Ring and elsewhere. For a few brief moments we're part of a more personal journey focused entirely on the elite's plight and their quest for retribution. I can't think of too many other examples of Bungie doing similar. Exodus in Reach is always my go-to example when it comes to a self-contained story within a Halo title, and while it's not something I'd want peppered throughout Halo's campaigns all the time, on this occasion, it really works. As is now tradition, Halo 2 features a special, particularly chatty grunt who can be found halfway through Uprising.
Please, no hurt. Me like elites. Brutes stinky bad. Me stay here, make sure no brutes come behind mighty Arbiter.
I would have liked him to be a bit harder to find. The thirsty grunt in Combat Evolved hidden down a random corridor during the Moore's Warthog run, and 3's sarcastic grunt sitting just out of sight at the end of Halo, also during its Warthog sequence, both carried with them a sense of achievement if you manage to find them organically. It's unlikely you'll miss the Cowardly Grunt full stop. However, because his dialogue trigger seems to be tied to something in the background, I'm sure there are many who didn't realise what they'd discovered, as unfortunately his lines often won't trigger and he'll just sit there quivering. He remained completely silent during several of my recent playthroughs, until I did eventually manage to get him to speak. I remain in the dark as to what made that happen. It's also worth mentioning before we move on that there is another example of a brute reacting to events here, like the two searching for their friends earlier, with one of them hurrying to warn his mates after you burst into the room.
Elite resistance! Warn the others!
Given Uprising is predominantly about the elites and brutes duking it out, these little interactions give your enemy a much needed splash of extra personality. From the narrow hallways of the Forerunner structures, you transition into a less enclosed section, although only slightly. In the context of Halo 2, this is actually one of my preferred vehicle sequences, by virtue of the elites also jumping in ghosts and the hefty number of brutes clogging up the two larger areas towards its beginning. The action can get pretty intense, helped hugely by unyielding blasting out in the background. It is intensity by numbers rather than any sort of meaningful design though, and remember that idea because I'll return to it shortly. Once the open areas have been cleared, you follow a stream downhill and reach a checkpoint of sorts you need to get through. As you can see, I chose to kill everything, but you can just speed right through it should you prefer. It makes a lot of sense in world for such a concentrated group of Covenant to be there. It's essentially a choke that can be held to stop anyone from getting any closer to Installation 05's control room. At the end of the trail is an example of game design Bungie is always really good at, that is, leaving weapons or enemies equipped with them at the start of a section during which they'll be most effective. On this occasion, it's 2 jackals you can eliminate to secure a beam rifle, allowing you to safely clear out the first group of brutes ahead of you without being bothered by them at all. This final slog through Uprising's latter stages is one of my least favourite parts of Halo 2. You've already had to kill a lot of brutes, so many at times it sometimes feels like there is a never-ending stream of them waiting to crush you, and now you have to kill a huge amount more, while jackals regularly try to blow your head off with their rifles from afar, and wraiths fire lovely hot balls of plasma up at you from below. Halo 2's brutes can be frustrating at the best of times thanks to their absurd health pool, and that's without taking into account them going berserk once they're the last of their pack remaining, and these additional jackal and wraith-based annoyances being present are for me the straw which broke the camel's back. You can be struggling to deal with several brutes pinning you down, or a single brute charging straight at you, all the while managing to just about stay alive, but it won't matter because a wraith will melt you or a jackal will snipe you. Both threats are hard enough to deal with on their own, so the last thing needed was a metric shedload of brutes thrown into the mix as well. Even on lower difficulties, it's an exhausting affair which goes on for too long and becomes tiresome too quickly. I think Bungie understood how dodgy this section is too, honestly, given there is a shameless weapon dump halfway through, one of few in the whole series, allowing you to choose from just about any human or Covenant weapon you fancy. To me, it's almost like an admittance, or an apology, for this part of Uprising really not being all too well balanced. Even this elite seems quite unimpressed.
What vulgar taste! Even as trophies, these weapons are worthless!
I can usually breeze through the vast majority of Halo 2 on Heroic without breaking much of a sweat, but let me tell you, a few beads were definitely beginning to form while bumbling my way through this particular dog's dinner. Like the earlier vehicle section, it is difficulty due to numbers instead of Bungie's usual difficulty due to challenging but engaging design, and I'm always glad to see the back of it. Uprising closes with a bait and switch as the Arbiter is confronted by a wraith, which it turns out thankfully is being piloted by Halfjaw.
By the rings, Arbiter. The councillors, are they...
Murdered by the brutes.
Vile, disloyal beasts. The prophets were fools to trust them.
In my view, Uprising is the quintessential middle-of-the-road mission. With regards to gameplay, it has its good parts, most notably the vehicle section in its middle and some of the early battles alongside elites, but equally it can be frustrating due to the sheer number of bullet sponge brutes you have to deal with at regular intervals. Likewise, when it comes to story, I personally rather enjoy its somber start and the opportunity to retaliate against the brutes and the Covenant. However, it's also a level which does not move Halo 2's wider story forward much at all, which is somewhat strange so late in the campaign. How much you get out of the experience I think will ultimately come down to how much value you place on the smaller story of the elites contained within the level. If you don't care about it, then Uprising will often feel like a grind without the requisite payoff. If it does interest you, then I reckon Uprising might be right up your alley. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a brute-tabulous time, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know what you think of Uprising, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.